Just heard, you can't be moved. That is great. Thank you all. Thank you. I just came from Winston-Salem today, and the first thing I wanted to tell you is that God, your Father, loves you, that Christ died for you, and the Holy Spirit walks with you each and every day. I hope that is so reassuring to you this day and every day. Our gospel account this morning comes from St. Mark's Gospel, chapter 5. So if you would please turn your scriptures to Mark's Gospel, chapter 5. And we will begin with verse 21. Mark's Gospel, chapter 5, verse 21. Hear now the reading of God's holy and precious word for his people on this Father's Day. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue rulers named Jairus came there. Seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her, so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all that she had. Yet, instead of getting better, she got worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up from behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was free from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some men came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Ignoring what they said, Jesus told the synagogue ruler, "Don't be afraid. Just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue ruler, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately the girl stood up, walked around. She was 12 years old. At this they were completely astonished. They gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this, and told them to give her something to eat. And again, may God bless the reading of his holy and precious word. This is a very interesting text, and the reason I chose it was because we are having a gospel account with a father, and his daughter is taken sick. And then we are going to see, as we work through our way, that we are going to see faith, we are going to see healing, as Jesus does what he does best. So I've entitled this today, and this is to all fathers, do you trust me enough to walk with me? Do you trust me enough to walk with me? This is a challenging piece of scripture to preach. Actually, it's two different incidences that one follows the other. But my focus this morning will be the initial contact with Jesus, touch upon the interruption encounter. I'm feeling we need to give some attention to the importance of an interruption in our spiritual walk. You know, that can happen as we try our best to walk with the Lord hand in hand. Sometimes there are interruptions that cause us to examine our faith. In the text, we are very quickly introduced to the ruler of the synagogue, Jairus. Now, what was his position? He was the administrator of the synagogue. And so he made sure that things were running smoothly in the church. He probably did some cleaning in the church, but he was the go-to person for the synagogue. This was a man, Jairus, who was acquainted with problems as his own. There were many from the synagogue over the years that he had tried to comfort. This was one of his duties as well. He provided pastoral care to those in need. And let me just stop right here. A lot of my background has been in chaplaincy. And let me tell you, when the hard times come to these families, it is so important that we minister to them. Many in the synagogue over the years called Pastor Jairus to visit them in the hospital while they were sick. They'd been in an accident or there was tragedy somewhere. He had made many home visits over the years to welcome new members. We find this well-respected Jairus, the administrator of the synagogue, now faced with what has become a very real tragedy that has taken up residence in his own home. You know, there's one thing when we minister to people who are going through hard times and or difficult times. But when it makes full circle and comes back to our house, that's another thing, isn't it? Sure it is. The Bible calls our attention that his daughter lay sick in the bed. Now, please bear in mind that Jairus had the best HMO that there was going. The primary care physician had already made their diagnosis. Jairus, I'm sorry, but we have done every single thing that we can for your little daughter. Any parent, especially a father that has had a child sick, knows the emotional toll that it pays on a mother and father as well. He may have questioned God. He could have even blamed God, couldn't he, for his misfortune. He probably had a feeling of anger, maybe even self-pity. I can feel the anguish of this father and every father in the sound of my voice today. You can feel that when one of your children has been sick, and or especially when one of your children has gone on to be with the Lord. He probably just really wanted to scream, don't you think so? To scream and holler, but not knowing who to scream at. A feeling of helplessness, and yet a great desire to do something, but not knowing what to do. Have you ever been there? Have you ever been there? Not knowing what to do. Even beginning to think, God, I have been serving you the best I know how. I am your faithful servant. And now this. In the anguish of Jairus, he now remembers, oh, by the way, I know that there's a young rabbi walking around, and his name is Jesus. He remembers hearing about the young rabbi, and he's teaching in the synagogues as well. He remembers having heard of this man. He had the power to heal, so he gets excited. He had healed a man with a withered hand. And of course, there was the tale about the man who was insane, who lived among the tombs. And they said he healed them. He heard the story about the wedding at Cana, where Jesus went and he turned the water into wine. Whether he is a true prophet or whether he is a charlatan, Jairus didn't know. All he knew, watch this, all he knew was that his daughter was sick and he wanted to help her. I'm not sure how Jairus knew how to find Jesus on this particular day in the midst of the need. Jesus had just disembarked a ship having crossed the sea. Great crowds were already there. The text says much people gathered around him. You see, Jesus is drawing people to them. Jesus was still on the bank of the sea. Word had begun to spread quickly that Jesus, he's returned. Jesus has come back. Perhaps many had been waiting on the bank for a long time, waiting for him to return. The text makes it appear as though Jairus just accidentally walked upon Jesus suddenly or stumbled across Jesus. Watch this next piece. That is so true and speaks to the heart. He had no time to think about what he was going to ask or how he was going to even put it in words, what he wanted. He fell at the feet of Jesus and he began to plead. My little girl is sick. Would you come, please? Come with me to my home. Lay your hands on her. And I know, watch, did you see the faith piece? And I know that she will be healed. Maybe not, perhaps. Now let's see what happens. I'm sure that this father had probably rehearsed what he was going to say. Let's see this now. When I stumble across Jesus, this is what I'm going to say in this order. But all our dignity goes out the window when we come face to face with Jesus. You see, you can talk about what you're going to say forever and ever, but when you stumble and you come across Jesus, it doesn't matter. There's no way to be dignified with tears running down your face. And we are on our knees begging for help. When you begin to beg Jesus for help and he delivers you, you can't help but get excited. You know that? How about the times that you didn't know what you were going to do, how a bill was going to get paid, and you took it to Jesus, and you know what? It worked out, didn't it? How about when maybe a child of yours was delivered? How about when a sickness was healed? You and I will be like Jairus. We will fall down and worship Jesus. It is this man's faith that compelled Jesus to follow him. Did you get that? It is this man's faith that caused Jesus to follow him. Jesus was attracted by that faith, and he went with him to heal her. Isn't it interesting that the text does not record that Jesus even spoke one word to this man? Not one word did he speak. If you look at the text in verse 24, and Jesus went with him. Most of us didn't even catch that little piece right there. It seems initially our faith, when we are first saved, is mirrored in this verse. We start our Christian journey simply wanting Jesus to come with us. Would you follow me, Jesus? We almost view him like an all-knowing bodyguard. The text says Jesus went with him. Jairus must have been feeling good. Oh, yes, I've got the healer, and he's following me, and I'm excited now because he is going to help my daughter. As he and Jairus and the disciples are walking along, here's the here's the hiccup, if you will. A woman came up from behind Jesus and secretly touched the hem of his garment. And Jesus asked the question, who is it that touched me? And there, you got to imagine the crowds all around Jesus now. And the disciple says, "How are we supposed to know who touched you, Lord?" "This touch is different," Jesus said. "I felt virtue leave my body." Some will paraphrase that little piece by saying, "Someone had made a demand on my ability." We must now put ourselves in the place of this Father. For a moment, I want you, as best as you can, to place yourself in his sandals. He has desperately made his way through the crowds to beg Jesus to come because his daughter is dying. He wants Jesus to hurry up. Now, in the time that we live in, whatever we want it when? Come on, it's okay to say it in church. I want it right now. Let's admit it right up front. We want it right now. Then the woman sneaks up behind Jesus, and noticed it was an act of faith for her as well, that she had the faith to believe if she just touched his garment, she was going to be healed. As Jesus stops, look at this, and Jesus stops and he ministers to this woman. Jairus, standing over here. "What are you doing, Jesus? You said you were going to go to my house and heal my daughter. And here you are stopped in the middle of the street ministering to this woman." Jairus begins to say, "This is not fair. This isn't fair." You know, sometimes we say that life is not fair. He's saying this is not fair. The woman has been sick for 12 years, but my daughter is dying right now. I came to you first, Jesus. I came to you first. You should come with me first and heal my daughter. And then Jairus goes off on a side jaunt. He said, because she is ceremonially unclean, she doesn't even have the right to be here in the midst of all these people. And at the time, the Levitical law stated that because this woman had an issue of blood, she was ceremonially unclean, and she could have been stoned to death. But you see what she risked? She risked her life to go to Jesus. I don't know about you, but I have learned in my life to appreciate and thank God for the hiccups and the interruptions that occur, that God sends in my life. Just when things seem to be going so well, here comes an interruption. That could have happened to you this week. It could have happened to you this past week, this past month. Yeah, it can happen. Just when you are preparing in the workplace for promotion, here comes a hiccup, an interruption. Just when your health seems to be improving, you're getting better, here comes an interruption. The interruptions that I encountered in my life have helped me to refocus my attention on God and take my sight off of me. Interruptions, I want to make sure, I want to spend just a minute on this, and I want you to please listen. Interruptions are not sent to harm us. They are sent to help us. I'm not trying to welcome interruptions in my life, rest assured. But after all, God has a better plan than I do. Yeah. The interruption in the life of Jairus would be used to elevate his faith to the next level. And that was so important. Here Jesus is taking up precious time with this woman. Are you feeling what Jairus is feeling? You've got to feel that to understand this story. The narrative is evidence. Watch this. I've heard it all my life, but this is the perfect piece for it. The narrative is evidence that Jesus is no respecter of persons. Jesus is no respecter of persons. Does that mean he doesn't love you? Absolutely not. He will minister to the highest person, and he will minister to the lowest person that is sleeping on the street. He had started going along with Jairus in response to his faith, and on the way he stopped and ministered to this woman. This demonstrates the fact that the Lord is not looking for those who have health or wealth, or they think that they are somebody. This woman was healed. How? Because of her faith. Can you only imagine how Jairus' spirit must have been lifted when he actually saw this woman healed? Hey, I know he can do it now. I just want him to hurry up and let's go. Oh, but Satan will not allow us to enjoy good news for long, right? Yeah. A message is on the way that will totally devastate Jairus. He gets word, teacher, your daughter has died. Now, I could stop right here and we could spend the rest of the day and this week talking about death. Nobody wants to talk about that, because I have dealt with it so much in hospitals, in hospice, and in general, in church. And then the people say, don't trouble Jesus anymore. She's already dead. Immediately he turns to this shocked father. Watch what he said. We need to remember this. He said, do not be afraid. Only believe. In other words, what Jesus was saying is, don't panic. Don't panic. Can I hang my hat here for a few short minutes? This is where all too often you and I fail as believers. The word went right to Jairus as soon as the bad news arrived. When he received the bad news, we spend too much time, I think, doing everything else before we take it to the Lord in prayer. What will we do? We will fall out. We will cry. We will complain. We will moan. We'll get on the telephone and say, why me? Why me? And then, as we get to that breaking point, has anybody been there? Anybody been to the breaking point? Then we go to Jesus. Jesus immediately addresses and comforts Jairus. Hear the truth. This is the truth. Death was no greater a challenge for Jesus than sickness. He had the power to restore life. That is why he told Jesus not to panic. So I just stopped to ask you this morning. And every question I always ask begins with me. Do I have enough trust and faith to walk with Jesus? And now I ask you, the believers, do you have enough faith? And do you trust Jesus enough to walk with you? Come on now. What was Jairus to do? What do we do when our situation goes from bad to worse? Anybody ever experienced that? What do we do when your marriage goes from bad to worse? What do we do when our jobs go from bad to worse? What do we do when our children go from bad to worse? What do we do when our finances go from bad to worse? What do we do when the charges on our credit card go bad? I can hear Jesus. Yeah, I can hear Jesus this morning. Do you trust me enough to walk with me? Do you allow the Word of God to pierce your heart when things go bad? Obviously, Jairus' mental and emotional attitude had a great deal to do with what was going on. And the same is true with us. When the Lord tells us not to be afraid, don't panic. The first thing that Jairus had to understand was, please remember, if your eyes are getting heavy, please remember this. The first thing that Jairus had to understand was that Jesus does not do funerals. Some of you are looking at, come on now. Jesus does not do funerals. Let me give you a couple examples. Will you remember when he was traveling in the city of Nain, where he ran into a funeral procession? A mother, a widow, lost her husband, and now she's burying her son. He stopped the funeral procession, touched the boy on the hand, and told him to rise. You remember Lazarus, don't you? Been in the grave for 4 days? Not sure why Jesus hung around on the outskirts except to make things known the way he wanted it. Again, Jesus does not do funerals. He went right on toward Jairus' house, just as he had said he was. Jesus did not tell this man, I am so sorry, Jairus. He didn't say that, did he? No. He did not say that. He did not say, I'm really sorry, but it was just too late for me to be there. That is not what Jesus said, and it is not what he did. He went right to Jairus' house, just as if nothing had ever happened. Jesus is saying, Jairus, do you trust me enough to walk with me? Do you remember, just one quick thing I want to add here. You remember initially, Jairus was in charge. Okay, Jesus, come on. I'm leading the way here. He was in charge. But in the end, it was Jesus who was in charge, wasn't he? Do you trust me enough to walk with me? I heard the news, I heard the report, but do you trust me enough to walk with me? I'm going to keep on walking to your house, Jairus. Here we see the end of this fast narrative. As Jesus walks into the house, he took the little girl by the hand and said, "Little girl, arise." And she did. If you and I will just walk with Jesus in the times of adversity and heartache and pain, if you refuse to let go of your faith, Jesus can, will, and make a way. Jesus says to us, he says to me, I can resurrect your marriage. I can do that. Do you trust me enough to walk with me? I can resurrect that bank account. Because right now, you couldn't even get credit to buy a pack of double bubble gum. Couldn't do it. Do you trust me enough to walk with me? Whatever your eyes see, it is not your ultimate reality. So what I want to close is say with you, that when those hard times come, and we all have been there, haven't we? If we are honest with each other, we have been in those hard times. Jesus is saying, don't panic, don't give up. Don't lose your faith. Walk by faith. So to fathers today, may we remember that we must walk by faith and not by sight. And my prayer for each of us on this Father's Day is that we will thank our fathers for what they did for us. Now, unfortunately, like maybe some of you, my father is not living anymore. The pain is there, yeah, but I've got faith to believe that I'll see him again. So what are you going to do with Jesus this morning? Are you going to walk with him? Are you going to trust him? I hope that you will. I will be down here to receive you in any decision that you need to make. Maybe you haven't been walking by faith. Maybe you haven't been walking with God. Let this be the day that you do it. Come to the cross. Once again, Jesus is softly and tenderly waiting for you here. Our hymn of invitation is Good, Good Fathers at 481. Hymn 481.